most of the time, the world of moms is a little foreign to me. I remember one of my best friends having a baby years ago, and her daughter is now an adorable, brilliant elementary schooler. But the first thing I noticed after she had this baby was that it was like she was getting absorbed into another world. She almost never got a full night of sleep. And it was like she started speaking another language overnight. She talked about sleep regressions and feeding schedules and something mysterious called tummy time, which I only learned later was like exercise for infants who can't sit up yet. And although I love her and her daughter, which goes without saying, I remember a kind of sadness in watching my friend get totally immersed in this new role and thinking, wow, we're never going to have as much in common again as we used to. But two things I know I have in common with my friends who are parenting right now are sleeplessness and worry. These days, there is no rest for the righteous. Each day seems to bring with it more heavy news: the death of a loved one from COVID, the systematic cutting away of civil and human rights protections, police violence against peaceful protesters, and this week, in an even more frightening form, unidentified federal mercenaries making secret arrests of citizens on the streets of Portland, Oregon. With the White House's threats to move the secret police force into Chicago, Albuquerque, and other cities where the man occupying the Oval Office has met opposition, we can no longer pretend that fascism hasn't arrived in the United States. Amid all the personal suffering in our day-to-day lives, we cannot look away from this large-scale violence just because it feels far away. Racist state violence is a virus every bit as much as COVID-19, and it didn't take long for the latter germ to make its way across the country. There is no rest to be had. So when a line of white mothers in Portland donned bike helmets, joined with Black activists, and stood strong in front of federal paramilitaries while singing the protest slogan, "Hands up, please don't shoot me," to the tune of a nursery rhyme, it reminded me of all my friends, all my past congregants, all my acquaintances who are taking on the unique and harrowing challenges of parenting in a time of sickness and upheaval. It reminded me of their sleepless nights, their desperation to finally get the baby to rest, of being protective, vigilant, and worried. In spite of a barrage of constant claims coming from the administration that these protesters were violent and dangerous and needed to be quelled by the full shock force of tear gas and unmarked vans, this wasn't anything like raging against the machine. This was more of a lullaby against the Legion. And I am going to share a video for those of you who haven't seen it. This is the Wall of Moms in Portland, Oregon. So in spite of the technical difficulty there, I do believe that that's worth sharing because that, when seen in the context of a protest, is a really powerful image. But as powerful and enduring as this image and sound is, we can also see it as powerful and embodied strategy. On the one hand, some journalists are kind of keen to denounce the group, which are calling themselves Momtifa, because in their view, they take focus away from the central matter, violence against Black lives. But Black writer and sociologist Zoe Samudzi believes that, and I'm quoting here, the affective power of the mothers group singing lullabies and standing before the police relies on white women's innocence and the sanctity of white motherhood as its driving force. And she argues that they're making the tactical choice to appropriate the power of white supremacist ideas about protecting white children for good. Of course, we understand that white women are not all innocent. In fact, white women have the capacity to wield this idea of innocence against Black bodies like a weapon. But in a culture so dependent on racism, inequality, and violence, this presumption of innocence, which is truthfully a privilege, can also be used in service, in protection, and in solidarity. The Wall of Moms is exactly what it says: a protective barrier, a magic boundary that says you may go no further. But boundaries only exist because they protect something precious at the center. It is the fundamental preciousness, importance, and holiness of Black lives that dreamed this boundary into being. And in some ways, this barrier really does work like magic. When Zoe Samudzi talks about affective power, she's talking about the deep sensations that we all carry in our bodies. She's talking about the way that we react to threats in our brain and nervous system. She's talking about the physical sensation of belonging, of having our hearts stirred by the soothing, rocking melody of Ring Around the Rosie, the fundamental cry of innocence that is, hands up, please don't shoot me, and the sympathetic pangs of anxiety that even powerful people experience when seeing a mom or a child in danger. And through that affective experience, the surge of comfort and fear at once, they point not at themselves, but directly at the central tenet that Black lives matter, that violence against Black people, trans people, migrant children, activists, and protesters should be hitting us right in the gut with the exact same physical horror that we feel when we see a parent and their child in danger. Mom Tifa is just the boundary, just the illustration, but it is not and never meant to be the center of the story. They're using deep affective power and building that connection, that association, in a way that is remembered within our bodies. And the thing is, our bodies will remember this moment. However long we go on to live, our bodies will remember the fear that gripped us in the summer of 2020, when the air recently passed through others' lungs wasn't safe to breathe, when protesters were disappeared from the streets of major cities, when we tensed up every day thinking about the potential risks of sending our children back to school, of going to work, of going to church together, of opening our mouths to sing in public. We're tired, we're sleepless, we're cranky and overwhelmed and raw. Whatever relationship we may have had with our own parents, there's still kind of a soothing quality to the idea of a loving parent figure, kind of an archetypal platonic mom, dad, baba, granny, coming in to rock us to sleep, sing us a lullaby, to tell us everything will just be a little easier in the morning. But right now, we're in the midst of a long, hard night. We are going to need to become experts at self-soothing and fast. And this is where we can harness that magical affective power for ourselves. We can claim the embodied sense of comfort, even if comfort outside us cannot be found. We can be our own loving mom, sitting over our own cradle, protecting our hearts and spirits from harm. Resma Menachem, a Black somatic therapist and trauma specialist based in Minneapolis, which of course you will remember as the epicenter of this summer's uprising for Black lives, has written extensively about trauma response in the body. He writes, "My grandmother was a strong and loving woman, but her body was frequently nervous. She often had a sense that something terrible was about to happen. It was an ancient, inherited sensation that rarely left her, a traumatic retention. She frequently comforted herself by rocking both forward and backward and from side to side. When I would watch her rock, she never looked nervous or neurotic. Instead, it felt like a sacred ritual imbued with meaning and purpose. Sometimes she let us grandkids sit on her lap as she rocked. When I close my eyes, I can still feel my body settling into her soft, thick arm, holding me steady and safe across my chest, and the wave-like motion of being rocked, of becoming part of the flow. This feeling of being gently rocked is a deep comfort mechanism that lives inside all of us. Many autistic children and adults instinctively understand its power. And as the stress of the pandemic wears on, even people who believed they gave up rocking back in their childhood are returning to it. As early as the first week of COVID-related shutdowns, mental health specialists were already writing about rocking as a self-soothing mechanism to cope with anxiety and uncertainty. Earlier, I said that The Wall of Moms was the illustration, not the story. But as it turns out, they're a pretty good illustration for how to use privilege in solidarity, for how to redirect and control a narrative strategically, and even for how to self-soothe in a time of heightened anxiety. And the reason we can even talk about all of these ideas within the same church service is because we have a strong boundary to contain them. They're showing us that all of us are the same watchful, protective, fiercely loving presence that we need. We are not alone. We are here for one another. We will guard and safekeep each other come hell or high water. If and when the trouble and the sickness and the legion comes to us, we need only join together with the voices that insist on our right to be safe, our right to be loved, and our right simply to be. Our ancestors insisted upon it, and our descendants depend upon it. And as long as there are kin nearby to guard the cradle of our spirit, to protect it with ferocity and power and defiance all through the sleepless night, we will fulfill the wishes of our grandparents and our children. We will survive, not alone, but together. Amen, and blessed be.